Welcome to the Dragon's Den. I'm your venerable host Orochi, and today we're going to continue our journey into the Impossible Lands. Today we are going to be covering the Mana Wastes. There's not a whole lot of stuff going on in this area due to the fact that it is basically nuclear fallout, the fantasy version. Because I haven't played it, but I imagine that this is sort of like Escape from Tarkov and, the Fallout games and that sort of stuff, where it's like the above ground has been decimated by all of these forces, and there's unseen dangers everywhere, like radiation. You basically have magical radiation in the Mana Wastes, except for it's magic, so of course you can describe it as being visible and all these other things, because magic takes a dozen different forms. Maybe there's just random spells going off. Maybe it is a literal radiation-like effect where you can't see it exactly, but you can see the effects of it, like explosions and, force multiplying winds and effects. So there's a lot of leeway on how you can really show this kind of stuff. And there's also mechanics for how the instability of magic in the area can also affect player casting and NPC casting. And I think that's really cool. I do think it was unfortunate that the AP that actually allows you to go into this area does not use any of those rules. Like, it might have been available and suggested that, but my GM never brought it up or said anything about it, so I think that's kind of unfortunate. It brings a lot of flavor, and a lot of people have complained online about that, since in the fluff, the lore of playing around Alkenstar is that, yeah, the Mana Waste and the surrounding areas, including Alkenstar, are magically unstable. But the AP also kind of says, but we're not going to force any of that stuff onto you. We just want to use it as a backdrop for good storytelling. And it's like, on the one hand, that's fine. You don't want to screw over your casters, especially since, casters already have problems. But if you go into this sort of area, then you think you would already accept that, that's a thing that's going to happen. Anyhow, we've got the different kind of peoples that live here, which is pretty cool. This is predominantly monster races, which I'm always a fan of. The fact that it doesn't go, hey, humans everywhere, 90% humans. That's a huge yes please for me. And we got the different factions of power that are in the area, with the different religions, and the kind of resources you can find here. And I liked this section of the book because there is a lot of fantastic art here. We are going to skip around a bit right now and get to them. Like, look at that. A whole bunch of gnolls. They're all bloodied and tore up. And you can see it. There's this stuff coming out of the ground, and it all looks like blasted lands. And then over here, you're like, oh, hey, well, that looks like green lands. It's like, oh, no, that's gas. That's all, like, toxic freaking gas. Because then you can see, like, perhaps more mountainous regions up here that are also barren and red-scarred. Is good stuff. Here we have the map. We have Alkenstar over here, and Dangun Holds over here. Nex up there, Geb down there, and all of this area is the Mana Wastes. Predominantly, all of the people, clans and settlements and everything that are in the Mana Wastes tend to be along the borders, so that they can try and avoid some of the mutants and creatures and heavy spell effects that are in the mana wastes and having some sort of safety going into the non-blasted areas. But then I'm sure there are plenty of like border guards and stuff from these two nations that also make that not a fantastic idea. So this is basically the worst place to live, but people still do it, which is very interesting storylines. And I think you can also play this up some to get more of that Wild West feeling that Alkenstar itself does not give you at all. Alkenstar is very steampunk, whereas the Mana Wastes, they have it. Yeah, there's small little settlements here and there, and you can say it's like, oh hey, here's a settlement. They have 5 structures, and maybe they're all in a line, and that's exactly how the Wild West was. So you can kind of make out more of that sort of feeling here if you want it, because we have guns here. Like there's whole goblin tribes that reverse engineer and create their own not stable guns, but they are there, and all these little towns that don't really have good ways to get a hold of each other and all that stuff. So you can definitely get that Wild West or spaghetti western kind of feel in the Mana Wastes. It might be a little bit more or less depending on how much you use it, fantasy magic, enforced, but you could easily just say, like Outlaws of Alkenstar, just not use any of the wild magic kind of stuff, the wellspring magic kind of stuff, and the magical hazards. You can basically just say, oh yeah, none of the party is ever going to run into these, because they don't really want to play up that flavor. You want to stick more to like the Wild West kind of flavor. And since this is basically a desert slash badlands, this is exactly where you can get that. Which, it's great that is an option, since when you look at Alkenstar and the kind of stuff that's there, because they show off gunslingers, not just as a class, but cowboy-esque gunslingers with dusters and wide-brimmed hats and all that kind of stuff. You get that feel. It's oh yeah, I definitely want to play cowboy gunslinger. It's like, well, that doesn't really fit in Alkenstar all that much, because they don't do any of those sorts of themes, but you can get them here. So that is super great. I'm very glad that you can lean into that here. And then we have all sorts of mutated animals, and you can see like these magic geysers that are just going off. Because the way magic is disrupted in this area is like there's an underlying lattice of magic throughout the world, and it was punched through so many times during the war that certain areas are dead zones, and like ripple effects, a lot of the magical lattice was forced out of that area and forced into other areas that can't support the build up, so then it eventually explodes. And I like that as a thought experiment. That's really cool, that magical ripple effects where you cast a high level spell in one area and it disperses that magic some, so then other neighboring areas might get overloaded with magic. So that's pretty cool. I also like a lot of the flavor of the types of people who live here, because I am rather biased, of course, towards lizard folk and kobolds. And lizard folk have a very prominent position in the wastes, because a lot of them used to live underground, so there's tons of tunnel networks in the Mana Wastes, which I think is also a fantastic story thing you can do, that different parts got irradiated heavily, so there are entire tribes especially one very specific tribe that was in the worst spot where they got genetic mutations from the magical fallout in the area, and a lot of them have albinism and blindness in their genetics from this mutations, and that's super cool. And lizard folk specifically have a tradition of being what is called in this area busos. They are basically scouts. They wander the wastes, mapping everything out, not just the physical landscape that may or may not change depending upon. There's a lot of spellcasters who go here to research or try to find shortcuts to power and all this sorts of stuff. So they maybe blast more holes in the ground and trying to do all these different magic things. And the Busos go around and they map not just the ground, but also all the different magical flow and eddies and where all like worst magical areas are, the concentrations of magical power that might be unstable and ready to explode, and where the dead zones are. And a lot of these areas aren't like fixed. A lot of them are like, they get blown around by the wind. And so all of these different hazards are mobile. So these scouts are going around and mapping this sort of stuff, and the vast majority of people in the wastes understand that this is needed. They need these sort of things. So even the more like chaotic evil sorts of people that roam the wastes will give these scouts free passage and maybe even like put them up for the night and feed them and stuff in exchange for their maps. I love that. That is such a cool idea, having, like a social class within this structure of just random groups that pretty much have nothing to do with each other, and probably a lot of them are kill on sight to each other. They all have this one class of, not really class, but one social structure that's just like, yeah, people who do this are respected, and that's fantastic. I think that is super cool, and it being predominantly done by lizard folk is just excellent to me. I love that a lot. I do kind of wonder how the blind albinos seem to be the most notable for that, and I wonder how they get around being blind. But then here we have the rules for Wellspring Surges. This is basically your wild magic. You get, depending upon where you are, how badly the concentration of disrupted magic is. Because Wellspring is also an option in Secrets of Mana Magic to not just cover this, but also like any character can use it. Because it means you tap into the more raw power of magic at a potential deficit. So depending on where you are, and it also says here that your GM should modify these numbers to fit the story. If you're in a really bad area and like magic storm's going on right now, then you might want to go, oh, hey, you're near a miasma. That you've got a 45% chance to fail, and I'm going to bump that up to 12, so then you have a 60% chance to have something go wrong with your spells. Because when you get a critical fail, this is the penalty of your spell. And some of them aren't bad. Some of them magic is weaker, some of them is your magic is stronger, some of them are surges, which there's a whole table of those in Secrets of Magic, which is kind of unfortunate that the rules are here for these sorts of things, but the general wild surges are in the Secrets of Magic. But you can find that stuff on Archives of Nethys if you absolutely want to use all of these rules in conjunction. But this is super cool. Like, if you just want to use this as a theme for your character, if you want to roll a Wellspring Mage and just flavor them like old school second and third edition wild magic, where it's like, yeah, every spell you cast has a chance to do this. And who was it? I believe it was the Dungeon Dad, or there's a YouTuber I watched a few months ago now, who basically had a very similar idea that I had, where if you want, because there are a few options within like the GMG and Secrets of Magic to broaden your capabilities as a spellcaster, or class archetypes and stuff you can take to change the way you do spell casting. And this guy's idea was give I I can't actually remember how different it was from mine. My idea was give people a lot more spell slots, but make it so that depending upon, if they're the spells they practice a lot, or after they've used their spell slots, have some sort of mechanic where they can push themselves beyond normal limits to cast extra spells, but then you start rolling for spell failure, and maybe even if you get a critical fail, then you get surge backs. And I think using the Wellspring Surges is a great mechanic to put into that space, because then you can allow casters to push themselves beyond their normal limits, but at a risk. I absolutely love that as a mechanic. Either create a whole character based around that, or just allow most of your spellcasters to do that. It's a very cool mechanic that's here specifically for this, but you can use it anywhere. And I think that's fantastic. And then right here, we have some of the goblin tribes who make all these weird weapons that basically don't use. Goblins have their own ammunition because they don't have any foundries or any way to mass produce weapons, so they've all taken to making their own stuff, and a lot of them either take unique ammunition for that specific weapon, or the goblin tribes have sort of settled on, their own ammunition type for their weapons, which is very interesting. And I think you can also be like, yeah, when they jam their weapons and get like 2 critical fails in a row, you break your gun and need to spend a significant amount of time fixing it, because it basically falls apart in your hands because they don't make stable guns. Or if you're using like energy types or higher level weapons or something, you could even say that they blow up, because maybe some of them are like flamethrowers and that sort of thing. There's a lot of cool areas to explore with ranged weapons, and having unstable ones is very interesting. Then we have 2 more great pictures here with Gitna, which is the largest lizard folk settlement, and it's defended by 2 bears, which is extremely cool. It doesn't say what the relationship is between those, so as a GM, that's perfect place to make up your own story for players to explore. You could make a whole adventure based on trying to find out how the residents of this settlement got these defenders. Maybe they have a contract, or maybe it's a spell, maybe it's something that you could use to get your own defender, or you could do a lot with it, and that's really cool. And then down here we have another big settlement. And this one looks kind of crazy. This one looks more like a capital city, but there aren't really any huge settlements in the wastes. This is more the I forget the name of them now. But there's a group of ex-Nex spellcasters who are trying to do what they can to fix the wastes, try to undo all the magical damage and fix the land. So, great place for druids who want to lean into that sort of flavor. And it's also interesting to try to think of how would an arcane spellcaster go to a place like this and try to undo magical damage? Because this has a lot of like Dark Sun flavors, where people were just drawing power from the land and destroyed it. That's literally the background of Dark Sun, and you've got a lot of that flavor here. And in Dark Sun, your options are, as a spellcaster, you're either drawing power from the land and killing everything around you doing so, or you cast weaker spells. That's basically your options. So looking at it here, it's like, what are your options as an arcane spellcaster to try and fix these sort of areas? And as a GM, you can go hog wild with that. There's lots of cool ways that you could make adventures based around just trying to do research and figure out how to start fixing the magical lattice of the land. Even as an arcane caster, you could do. This would be a great place to try and do like a primarily spellcaster group, even though that generally doesn't work too much unless your GM's really good at making encounters. But for a story, that's fantastic. A whole group of researchers that are just going out into these lands, working in this research station to find ways to help fix the land. Great stories. And then the rest of it is just important people in this land. So that is all for the mana wastes. There's a lot of cool opportunities for stories, and a lot of some interesting areas that you can play up Wild West sort of stuff, and also like nuclear fallout sort of areas. Some really cool stories you can make around these parts. But that is it for now. See you in the next one.